G'day everyone. Bit of warning before we start. We are going to have to be a bit creative with lights and bottles, so this probably might be one of the last times we have this set up, but we'll explain that as we go. I'm going to get straight into it. We're going to read straight off. We're in Acts chapter 12, so again, I'm going to read a little bit of it. Please do take the chance to read the chapter. It's not super hard to read a chapter of the Bible in a week, so please do get onto that. I'm going to start off by reading, and then we'll talk about, what's going on in Acts chapter 12 and how we can see kind of where the gospel is going and where people are at. So we start off Acts chapter 12, and I'll read from 1 through to 7. It was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. When he saw that this met with approval among the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the festival of unleavened bread. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. The night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers bound with 2 chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. Get up, he said, and chains fell off Peter's wrists. So there's this amazing escape from prison. So Peter then goes on and he gets out of prison, and he puts his clothes and sandals off, and he goes into the temple courts, and he goes back to the house where they're all praying, and he's standing there, and they all freak out because Peter's in prison. And they think potentially he's dead. So they're all a bit concerned because Peter, who was in prison bound with soldiers, is all of a sudden awake and free and loose. And so we see this kind of bit between Peter and prayer and his miraculous escape from prison. But we also see that James doesn't get that. So James and John, they are one of the kind of group of 3, basically, who hang out with Jesus quite a lot. And James is executed. So he and John have gone to Jesus at some point and asked Jesus if they could sit at his right and his left. And Jesus asked them, are you willing to drink the cup that I'm going to drink? Now, Jesus was talking about execution. That's what Jesus was talking about. That the cup is a term of God's wrath and judgment being poured out upon Israel, often through the prophets. That's what Jesus refers to. And they say, oh, yeah, we can, definitely. And Jesus says, yes, you are actually going to. And this is the fulfillment of that. James is executed. Now, we don't know why James dies and Peter doesn't. God intervenes in Peter's case, but he doesn't in James's case. But I think that does kind of give us a little bit of a thought, I guess, about how we can pray. I think how we can pray and how God answers prayer, we do see that we can imagine that James was praying. We can imagine that people were praying for James. He was one of Jesus' disciples, just like Peter was, yet he is executed and Peter is not. So it doesn't mean that God didn't like James as much as he likes Peter. That was part of the plan. That was just what was going to happen. And James being executed would have been tragic and incredibly sad for everyone left on earth. But he goes eventually to heaven. He gets to heaven. He gets to be with Jesus. That's the goal. So it is terrible that he's executed. But ultimately, that's not the worst thing that could possibly happen to him. And Peter has a role to play, and Peter's life is not great and carefree. So I think it does show us a little bit about, honestly following Jesus and being a follower of Jesus isn't all going to be great. Sometimes we're going to pray with everything we possibly can, and it's not going to come to the way we want it to come to. I mean, James was one of Jesus' friends and walked around with Jesus. You'd think that if it was about who Jesus liked the most, or who was the best follower of Jesus, or had the most faith, you think a disciple would be up there. But he is executed. So I think it is encouraging for us to pray, because it does get answered. Peter is released and he does get out. But it also helps us not be disheartened when things we pray for, things that we want, don't turn out the way we want them to turn out. Sometimes that's just how it is. It's not part of God's plan. Now, a lot of you will know, some of you might not, but my dad died when I was 20, and we prayed for him. He was a he did mission work. So he was a missionary in Papua New Guinea and in Zimbabwe. He was a full-time pastor down in Tassie and in Victoria at Beaconsfield. And he was a full-time army chaplain. So basically, from pretty early on in his kind of adult life, he was apprentice typewriter for a little while, but pretty early on in his adult life, he devoted his life to following God and telling others about God. That's what he did. He wanted to talk to other people about Jesus and tell them about Jesus. And he died from a really horrible disease, and plenty of people prayed. That just wasn't part of God's plan. It doesn't make the death any easier. It didn't mean that I was like, oh, well, that's just how it is. It was tragic. It was incredibly sad. It still is. I still wish that he was around and I could talk to him. But I also know that he's with God in heaven, and that's just not part of God's plan. So it can be encouraging for us when we read something like this to go, well, there's nothing against Dad. There's nothing against me. I mean, James was executed. So we do need to just trust in God's plan. So that's what we can kind of take out on a brief kind of top level from Acts chapter 12. We can see, though, how people are starting to get kind of anti-Jesus. They're trying to find ways to kind of get rid of Jesus' followers. And this Herod is not the same Herod. He is the grandson of Herod. So the Herod that we hear about in the Gospels and we're going to hear about in a month or two during the Christmas things, that Herod has a kid, and then that kid has another kid, and so that's another Herod. So he's the Herod we all know and don't like, his great-grandchild. That's that Herod. And he ends up dying. We see that at the end of Acts chapter 12. So he's the one who kind of kills James, has him executed, puts Peter in prison, and then we see him go to Caesarea, and he says some stuff, and people are like, oh, wow, you're amazing. This is the voice of a God, not of man. And Herod doesn't correct them. Herod takes that on and goes, yeah, I'm pretty awesome. I'll take that. And he dies right there, and his body's eaten by worms, we hear. So that very much that if it's the voice of God, how could you possibly die and have your body eaten by worms? But also, Herod, you should have said, no, I'm just a man. Because there are actually times, we're going to see this as we go through Acts. We've already seen it actually a little bit, but we will actually see it even more in Acts where people see what followers of Jesus can do and go, oh, well, you must be gods. And their response isn't, yeah, we're awesome. Their response is, no, it's all about Jesus. So that's the correct response to people saying that we're gods. But hopefully we can see in Acts 12, we can start to see how the gospel has spread. Obviously, we've got the light still up. We can see Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, they're out here. I was trying to remember where we were. So this is Cyprus. That's Antioch, and this is Phoenicia. So we can see that the gospel spread a little bit. Obviously, we still have from Pentecost, the coloured lights here. We're going to have a bit more colour being added very, very soon. The gospel is spreading, but with that, and with how awesome it is that the gospel is spread out, we've got to remember as well, if you can cast your mind back, this used to be full, and the reason that it spread out was because of persecution. And we've got to see again that persecution is there, that there's going to be opposition to what followers of Jesus are doing, to what the disciples are doing as they want to share Jesus with others. So we'll see that as we go through. Stay tuned. We'll see how everything else is going on. Hopefully you spotted my guest, and I'll catch you next week.